Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another devlog for Dauphin, my 2D RPG about a marine biologist that I'm building with the Godot engine. I'm joining you today on a very lovely Sunday morning. I've made it to the point in the weekend where I've knocked out all my chores and had plenty of time to relax, so I'm feeling charged up and ready to make some development progress. The plan today is to pick up where we left off in the last episode with the object placement system, but to take it in a slightly new direction. Over the past few weeks, I've been building out the core of that system, allowing the player to select objects from their inventory, place them into the world, make the correct collision checks to figure out if you can place something in a particular spot, and I've also built in the ability for the player to remove those objects from the world and save them to the world when you save and quit the game and reopen it. It's great to have this very vanilla technical foundation in place, but now it's time to actually focus our efforts on using that to build a Dauphin-specific gameplay system. And as I've mentioned before, that's going to be the player's ability to create campsites on islands that they've discovered. Campsites in Dauphin, even in their most basic state, will provide the player with a few immediate benefits. The shelter point of any given campsite will act as a save point, as well as a place for the player to rest and recover and pass in game time. The campsite in general will also act as a fast travel point so that as the player sets up campsites across islands, they'll be able to quickly travel between them. In addition to this, we'll have other optional benefits for the player depending on how they actually set up that campsite. So for example, a player could add various cooking or crafting stations to the campsite if they want that benefit, or they could add a bunch of decorations if they wanted to increase their comfort or rest bonus, as we see in games like Valheim, or if they just want to have a more aesthetic campsite if that's what you enjoy doing in these types of games. My immediate goal for today will be to start defining which placeable objects, likely something like shelter and fire, will be needed to define a new campsite. They don't have to start programming the notion of a campsite itself rather than just a bunch of randomly placed objects. Time to go heads down for now. We will catch up hopefully once I've made some progress. Hey everyone, so it's been a busy few days here and we have fast forwarded to Tuesday afternoon after work where I finally have some time to walk you through some pretty cool updates I've made. You probably noticed from the clips you just saw that I have been working on this thing, which is a new scene that I'm calling the Campsite Foundation. Hopefully from looking at this thing you should have a pretty good idea of what the concept is. The idea is that this is a big area 2D that describes the enclosing area of the campsite where you not only have the kind of foundational element of the campsite in the center, but room to place other fixtures and decorations around that center point. A select few placeable item types within Dauphin will have these campsite foundations as children in their scene hierarchy. The basic tent is the first one of these examples because it is of type shelter. Shelter, in all cases where the player places it, will act as the foundation for a new campsite. So basically, after there is shelter in the world, the player will be able to begin building out a camp around that shelter as the foundation. Here's what this looks like in practice after I've updated my object placement logic with this new system in mind. If we select something like the campfire, which we could previously place pretty much anywhere, you'll notice that no matter where we drag it, we can no longer place it, and that's because it needs to be part of a campsite when it's placed. If we instead switch to the tent here, you'll see that I can place this as I could previously, and we'll also see a preview of that campsite area that will surround this new foundation. So we can drop the tent here, we'll see that guidance disappear, but when we reselect a placeable item to put down, like the campfire, we'll now see that guidance reappear, and you'll notice that we can place the campfire here. If we move it outside of this campsite, we can no longer place it, but we can place it as part of the camp. This is definitely good progress towards this system, but we have a major weak point right now, which is the UI. It's easier for me to describe these rules that I've programmed to you and do a demo, but this is very undiscoverable by the player right now, so I need to find a way to communicate to the player why they can't place certain items in certain places until they have that foundation set up. That'll be the goal of our next development session either tonight or tomorrow morning, but no matter what, we'll catch up soon. Alright y'all, quick update here because the method I've chosen to start communicating campsite information to the player has ended up being quite simple so far. If I select the campfire and try to place it where we don't have a campsite, we will now see text below the player telling us that placement requires a campsite. We're going to be told that even if we try to place this on the wrong type of terrain or on top of another object, because the campsite is the first and foremost criteria we have to fulfill when placing an object. If we do have a campsite down when we're trying to place a campfire, we'll start to get a little bit more information. Of course, if it's a valid placement, we'll be able to just do that. But if we start to overlap with existing objects like the tent itself, the message will tell us that we have an object in the way. And similarly, if we try to place it on the wrong type of terrain, like the water, we'll be told incompatible terrain. So this is just a little bit more granular messaging around the criteria we need to fulfill to place something into the world. If you're wondering where the logic lives for this, as you might expect, it's within my placeable footprint class, which is the area 2D that describes how much space each placeable object takes up in the world. I have a process collisions function down here, which previously would just return true or false if we were experiencing a collision that would prevent placement, but now we take a closer look at all the different colliding scenarios, whether we're colliding with another placeable object, if we're colliding with terrain that we shouldn't be, or if this particular object is considered foundational, meaning that it does not need to be placed in a campsite because it describes the campsite, or if it's not foundational, it does need to be placed within the campsite. From there, we assign a reason, which I have defined as an enumeration up here, and we signal that up here in my placement eligibility changed signal. The communication to the player here is far from perfect, but I think it's a good start and provides a stronger foundation to actually get the player building a campsite. With this in place, I'm actually excited to go create some more objects that the player can use to build campsites so that we don't just have to look at the tent and the campfire as we continue to build this system out. As I look towards the end of the week here, I think I'm just going to have some fun creating some new items and have that round out the devlog. So we'll catch up for hopefully one more update once my campsite looks quite a bit nicer. Hey everyone, it is now Saturday afternoon. Been a busy few days, but they have been very productive. I've managed to create a handful of new items that you can place in campsites, and a little something extra to go along with that, so let's jump in and take a look. As we get started here, I first want to draw your attention down to the player's item bar where we have a handful of new items. Of course, we have our campfire here and our tent, but apart from that, we also have a potted plant that we can place, a chest in which the player will be able to store their items in the future, a big kind of camp-themed rug to perhaps keep the player more comfortable on the sand, and a bait chest. And you'll notice that I did steal some of these from the interior of the fisherman's hut. I've hooked all these up to our campsite construction system just as you'd expect, so we can go ahead and actually build our first campsite here on the water's edge near our research vessel. We'll start with the shelter, of course, so that we have a foundation to place other objects, and then we can just start to go ahead and add these items in wherever we please, kind of building out from that central area of the tent to create something that, in my opinion, actually is starting to look really nice here. Now, apart from just having all these new items we can place down, you'll notice that on top of our central foundational piece of the camp, we now have some text telling us what the comfort level is of our camp. You might have also noticed that as I was adding these objects, this number was increasing from 0 all the way up to 5. The idea here is to achieve an effect very similar to what we see in Valheim, where decorating your camp more makes it a more comfortable place for the player, such that when they leave the camp, they feel more well-rested and can carry certain buffs with them for a certain period of time. I've achieved this comfort value quite simply by just adding a new export to my base placeable class called Comfort Bonus, and this is just an integer that defaults to 0. If we look at one of my classes that inherits from placeable, like the potted money tree plant here, when I click on this and then look in the inspector, you can see that I've added a comfort bonus of 1, and that's actually what I've done for all the different placeable objects we looked at. So by putting 5 of those objects in the camp, we now have a comfort bonus of 5. The campsite foundation scene itself is a great place to calculate that comfort bonus and ultimately display that label with the comfort level. If we jump into the script here, you'll see that I have a function called calculate comfort. What we do is get our overlapping areas here for this area 2D, make sure that they are actually placeable footprints that correspond with placeable objects, and then we just increment a comfort value with that comfort bonus on each of those placeable objects. The result of all this is very straightforward. When we move a new placeable object into our camp and place it, that number will go up, and as an added bonus, when you leave the camp, that fades away, so you're only going to actually worry about that comfort bonus when you're in the camp. I know I say this at the end of pretty much every devlog, but I am super stoked on the progress this week. Seeing all these new items in the game and in the game world when the player actually places them is starting to make Dauphin just feel more and more like a real world and a real game, so that doubles down on my drive to keep going on it. With that said, I think we're in a great place to wrap things up for the week. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to the folks who support Dauphin's development and this channel on Patreon. Grimy supporters this week are Mega Ombre, Samuel SVD, Jess Sargo, and Kyle Van Riper. Beta supporters are Cody Odin and Vlad Sunny. Thanks so much for watching. I'm going to do my very best to keep up with all this consistent progress and uploading, so hopefully you'll stick around. I'll see you in the next one.